To start with, this is a very basic topic, but what is a tariff? Obviously, it's a duty or a tax that is collected on particular products at time of import into a country. These set of Section 301 tariffs are possible in the US because of the Trade Act of 1974. And actually, the current trade rep head, Robert Leitzinger, if I'm saying his name right, worked under the Reagan administration and used a lot of the Section 301 program to call out unfair trade practices in the 80s. It is the Office of the U.S. Trade Rep that makes recommendations for the president to approve. It requires the president makes the approvals before any tariffs are implemented. And lastly, it is Customs that has the enforcement arm to watch over those changes enacted by the president. So what are these proposed changes in the Section 301 duties? Right now, they are proposed, and there are about 1,300 harmonized tariff codes. There is a process through which the approval and the final, if they are to be implemented, is called out. And they do cover a wide range of commodities and industries. Party did some analysis and found that at the top of the list were televisions, pharmaceuticals, chemical products, furniture, and high-tech machinery. So there's a wide range of commodities covered by these proposed tariffs. And you may wonder, how did the U.S. Trade Rep come up with this list? The U.S. has been investigating Chinese unfair trade practices really for decades. China became a member of the World Trade Organization in 2001, December 2001, and it was after much discussion that they were finally voted into the World Trade Organization. But since then, there's been grumbling in the US that China has a lot of unfair trade practices. A call out recently was a plan that China put together in 2015 called the Made in China 2025 plan. It focused for China a change in the manufacturing practices to move from low-tech manufacturing to high-tech manufacturing. And they had really an in-depth look as a country for how could they become the powerhouse of manufacturing. What industries they aimed at were the ones that the U.S. Trade Rep was proposing tariffs to counter these areas. So as you see on the slide, the areas that China wants to focus on and become the manufacturing powerhouse includes robotics, advanced rail equipment, new energy vehicles, power equipment, biotech, solar, etc., aerospace, next generation software, agricultural machinery. They want to move away from low-tech products to high-tech products because they see that as a means to make China, again, a powerhouse globally. So the proposed tariffs that the U.S. Trade Rep put together are really in a direct response to these categories that China has called out in their 2015 plan called Made in China 2025. I'm not moving down here. So none of the proposed tariffs have yet been implemented. There are many groups in the US that have opposed these proposals. They've gone to Washington. They're calling upon their Congress person and senators to try and have some sense put into what happens. And as part of the 301 process, there is a timeline for what you can do as a company or an individual to let your voice be heard in Washington. The requests, let's see, there's two things happening. So you can put online comments into a portal. That deadline is May 11th. Or you can show up at a face-to-face hearing in Washington, D.C. on May 15th. If you're interested in doing that, the request to appear must be filed by April 23rd. After the hearing, the U.S. Trade Rep will hear rebuttals, and following that, we expect within 60 days, maybe as soon as a day following the rebuttal period, the U.S. Trade Rep could move forward with these 25% duties. But that's the timeline, and in looking at similar unfair trade practices and what the Trump administration has recently done, they tend to move quickly once decisions are made. So if you read the papers, if you listen to the news, the trade war is continuing. I check the headlines every morning. There's usually something new. I think President Trump likes to tweet his more aggressive tendencies towards China. The latest, not necessarily the latest, but the big headlines is he wasn't happy with the 50 billion, so he upped it to 100 billion. There's been very little as far as what that means. Is this $100 billion amount included in the current process with the current deadlines? Or is this going to be a whole separate new Section 301 targeted list of tariffs? So unfortunately, we don't have much information on that. We can guess on where it's going. But I think the reason most of you are listening to this is you want to know you are an importer of products probably covered by the 1,300 items on the proposed list. And you're trying to figure out how can you help your company maneuver through this troubling time. So before I suggest what things you could do, I want to make it very clear things that you shouldn't do. And that, first and foremost, is don't think about jumping to a new harmonized tariff code that's not on the list. And the reason that I call that out is US Customs has a massive database, and they have been collecting data for at least 25 years through their old system, and they've recently moved to their new system, the Automated Commercial Environment. They have data on shippers and importers and products, countries of origin, dollar values of products, and they have data analytics scientists that now extract data, and they work for the centers of excellence and expertise. And they will very quickly see that you have jumped from one harmonized tariff code that you were using on prior imports to a new harmonized tariff code. So please don't think that that's your way out. And in addition to that, don't consider changing your country of origin if in fact the goods are being manufactured in China. That is actually called transshipping. If you think you can take product that's manufactured in China and move it to Malaysia, swap out some documents, show it was made in Malaysia, that is actually considered fraud. And not only would you be liable to the increased duties when customs figures this out, you would then also put yourself into a penalty category and probably be liable for the big F word, fraud. So I would not want anyone that's listening to this to think you can pull a fast one over customs. They have data for 25 years. They know how you've been importing currently, and they will tell, the data will tell that you've made a change to what you're doing. So I would caution anyone that's not a quick save, and you don't want to try and pull a fast one over customs. On the counter side, what can you do? You're really in a quandary. Your company is importing a targeted product. Well, if you want to try and evade these duties, get them to the US before these 25% duties are applicable. What does that mean? If your manufacturer has product ready, or if they can speed up the production in their factory, ship it soon. We already know you'll have probably until the end of May at the soonest. We would envision these tariffs being implemented if they go through. It may be as late as July, but I wouldn't want to bank on that. So obviously, the sooner you can get product here, then you would be saving that punitive duty. Also, you need to look at what is this financial impact to your business. Will you be able to absorb the increase in this product, or do you need to pass these increases along to your buyers? And what timeline do you need to get that information to your buyers so that you still have a good relationship with your clients? The next thing to think about is changing what you import. And this goes under a big umbrella called tariff engineering. It is perfectly legal. If you're new to the concept, it's basically becoming very familiar with the harmonized tariff and the headings for the paragraphs, the headings that describe what you are importing today. And if you are in an area that allows you to alter that product a little bit, maybe not fully assemble it, maybe ship the parts to the US and assemble it here, or leave out a strong component of that item that you're importing so it no longer has the essential character that's described within that heading, you can find, in many cases, an alternate heading or a group of headings that you can apply to the parts, for example, that would not fall under these punitive 25% duties. As an example, and this is probably not the greatest example, I think I talked to some coworkers here. If you think of a finished keyboard, the keyboard as a unit is a keyboard. There is a heading for it. It's called keyboards. If you took the keyboard apart and you had the plastic panel that has the keys on it, and you maybe had the electronic board inside that controlled the keyboard, and then you had, I don't even know, a bottom piece. If you imported those pieces separately, they would probably not have the same heading as the finished keyboard. In that case, you would just assemble those items here in the US. You'd have some minor assembly cost in the US. If each of those 3 different headings for the parts no longer had the 25% tariff, you found a means to import the keyboard but not pay the 25% duties. So tariff engineering is actually a big area that many companies utilize to avoid tariffs on a regular basis before we even start considering these 25% duties. The other way to look at not paying these 25% duties is, can you source your product from alternative countries? Depending on the nature of the manufacturing you're having done in China, that may require a longer lead time. It might not if it's a simple manufacturing process. Maybe you already buy from 2 different factories. One's in China and one is in another country. Maybe you can switch the volume to that other country. But again, these are legal, legitimate ways that you can avoid these 25% duties. And lastly, something that I would hope that everyone that is on this call would do is file the comments in the portal per the instructions from the US Trade Rep. If your business is going to be negatively impacted because of these tariffs, the US government listens to that. So the more parties that file comments and rebuttals to what the president is intending, the better the outcome will be. In addition, just by sheer volume, the more comments, the more people that show up at the hearing, the longer the process is going to be for the US Trade Rep to get through the comments, the hearing, and the rebuttals. And I think that is the end of the short slide deck, and we're now going to move to questions. Yes. If you haven't yet typed in your question, please feel free to do that. There's a little arrow on the webinar deck that says questions. You just open that up and type them in. All right, so one of the first questions we had is if you were developing a new product, who would be the best authority to get the harmonized tariff code from? A broker, a lawyer, a supplier? US Customs actually identifies in the importing world experts as far as trade advice goes. They do list a customs broker, they do list trade attorneys, and they do call out consultants. You may have parties within your own company that are licensed customs brokers or who have gone through training to apply a harmonized tariff code. Any one of those is acceptable. The key to getting an appropriate harmonized tariff system number is really full disclosure. And for simple products, that's very easy to do. For more complex products, that's probably a longer lead time, some back and forth. And harmonized tariff numbers are not typically picked based on the duty rate. They're picked on what is correct. But the harmonized tariff is not a black and white book. There are many, many gray areas within the harmonized tariff. So that is why US Customs issues what they call binding rulings. And as an importer, you can actually write to Customs and get a binding ruling, or you can work with one of those experts that I called out earlier to help you get that. And you can also yourself look at binding rulings online and see if your product is identified in a recent ruling and see what the recommendation is for that harmonized tariff number. Next question, where do we find the list of the projected items and the 25%? And we actually have a link that is going to be included. It's now in the comments, and it also will be included in the webinar slide deck. Okay. After a duty increase is implemented, is it common or uncommon to observe a decrease? Section 301, I think it's going to be, it's all on or it's all off. I might be wrong because we're kind of guessing what the president decides to do. The way the law is written, the president does have a lot of say-so in how to apply tariffs. But just from my past experience, I would say these Section 301 duties, if they go forward, they would be applicable to all the tariffs in the final list, And until the president basically drops the date from when they need to collect them, it would be all the harmonized tariff. I could be wrong, but that would be my guess on how this is going to go. The other question I had from a client just this week was, how are these implemented? Which is a very good question. And it'll be similar to what Customs did with the aluminum and the steel. They create a new 99 tariff number. Chapter 99 is for special circumstances. And in that, they attach it to the regular harmonized tariff with a country of origin, China. So when the broker does the entry, they will get actually a reject if they don't attach the 99 tariff to the import. That makes it very easy to end the 25% tariff. It's not a major change to the harmonized tariff. The other question I got from a client last week was, is this just for goods that are manufactured in China? What about made in Hong Kong and made in Taiwan? US Customs only considers made in China actual China. Taiwan and Hong Kong are considered separate countries to US Customs. So it's only applicable to goods that are made in China. So, and I believe that's the end of our questions. I guess if you have any further questions, you could reach out.
Send a link to everybody to rewatch.
There will be a link sent to everyone that joined if you want to ask your question individually. So thank you all. Hopefully this was a little bit helpful, and hopefully you'll be listening to our next webinar.